Let's talk about my sculpture positions. Positions. A sculpture that started because I wanted to make a large-scale sculpture again. On January 15th of 2021, I visited the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts to see their annual student exhibition since some of my friends had work on display that year. This exhibition took place in their historical building, but I was very intrigued by what was happening in their main building.
Welcome! I'm Anne McCullum, the first female chair of the Board of Trustees in PAFA's 216-year history, and I'm proud to invite you into Taking Space.
Taking Space, Contemporary Women Artists and the Politics of Scale is a show that's about so many themes, self-portraiture, seriality, and so it's nice to really open up in this section that begins with artist self-portraiture and work that is figurative or in some way about the body, even in some unexpected ways.
Yeah, we really wanted people to enter the exhibition and be confronted with these self-portraits of female artists, as well as other figurative work that deals with the female body, for example.
So this is basically the exhibition. I didn't know much about it when I went into it, and it was pretty shocking to me to find out this is what it was about. I don't remember many of the pieces that were there besides two in this specific. This was one that caught my attention because it is large scale. You can walk into it and it just really stands out. It has a high contrast and a lot of beautiful structure to it. So it really caught my eye as a beautiful piece of work. But it isn't the artwork that sparked the inspiration behind Positions. At the time of attending this exhibition, it had been 9 months since my own work had been displayed on these walls. After leaving this school, I was craving to make more large-scale sculptures, but that didn't seem visible, mainly due to the lack of tools, materials, and permanent space. When you at some point have an institution to back up all the projects that you do, you become scared of leaving that space because you won't have those resources at your disposal as easily. And that is why many artists don't continue to make artwork outside of art school. But I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't impossible and that in some way I could produce something close to ideology. I didn't know it at the time, but there was a sculpture in this exhibition that would spark something that I couldn't even imagine.
But here in this section, many of the artists are dealing so much with history as a theme in their work. Deborah Priestley's piece, which features these many portraits of soldiers who served in World War I, is based on this panorama portrait from her family history. It's her great uncle. And it features an African-American regiment that served in World War I, and she takes this panorama picture that she inherits and decides to make miniature portraits of each of the men in the image. And so it's a piece that's really a meditation.
Some were listening Company B by Deborah Priestley, and the feeling brought me back to Dia Beacon when I saw Michael Heiser's megalith for the first time. My breath was taken away. I couldn't help but admire the beauty and uniqueness of the composition and installation. I actually made an entire video dedicated to the rock in the wall because of how much I love it, and this is basically no exception. It is 212 charcoal drawings on primed wooden board. These portraits of black soldiers sit flat against the wall in this very simple but powerful way. The portraits themselves were delicate and intricate. I thought it was genius to give each portrait space to breathe within each block. I was obsessed with her creativity and how she decided to display these intricate portraits. And like many others, I couldn't help but take a picture of it. I wasn't inspired immediately, Positions is a piece of art whose main feature is copper. At the time of visiting the exhibition, I had only been working with copper for a few months. In fact, I was just in the middle of creating my first framed copper sculpture, Bahio, a commission of 2 koi fish. I hadn't gone into it that deeply. I didn't know the potential of what I was going to make or what I could make. I was just getting familiar with the new 8-inch saw that I had purchased for this project because I knew my 4-inch saw was too small for the job. I mean, I could barely cut an 8-inch sculpture with it, though I somehow managed to do so. After leaving PAFA that day, I didn't think about Deborah's piece until the end of the year, in December, when I was looking through my photo albums and Deborah's piece came up. I still hadn't worked that deeply with copper yet. During that time, I was working on a self-portrait that I was painting on a giant slab of wood, again trying to feed my craving of working large scale. This time, however, I had worked with my new saw enough to have an idea of what I could create, and it was just a matter of figuring out how I could use the size limitation to make a large-scale sculpture, and Deborah's work was the answer to that. When seeing her work again, I picture her composition but with copper. Dozens and dozens of abstracted birds lined up. It made so much sense how each individual piece of board is its own entity, but together it is one piece of art. How do I make a large-scale sculpture? You break it into sections. January 9th, 2022. The bird sketches. I drew as many bird poses as I could find. I drew them loose and quick because I knew I'd abstract them later. I just wanted to capture the movement of them. After filling up 5 pages in 2 days, I took one of the birds and made what was a concept drawing to try out a design style and see if I could cut it. After creating something that I somewhat liked on the computer, I printed it out and noticed that a regular 1/16 drill bit was too big for the fine details I had created. Since I didn't want to enlarge the piece, I then had a new mission to find a small drill bit for it. Then came February 17th, the first drill day. The process required a lot of patience, steadiness, and precision since I was doing it all with a hand drill, and the drill bit was too small for the clasp, so I made a paper holder to keep it in place. Though it did slide quite a bit, it wasn't too bad that I couldn't keep working. For this bird, I had to drill a total of 31 holes, and since it was my first time using this small drill, it did take a minute to drill each hole. And after drilling, I got to do the exciting part, which was cutting. Now, this took several days to do because I wasn't used to drilling that much nor cutting such fine details. However, the cutting was mainly done as a test to see if my saw blades were fine enough for the details I wanted. I did like the final results, but I felt like I could go slightly smaller, so I did end up purchasing smaller blades. Since the design was approved, I could then work on the final drawings for all of the birds while the new blades arrived. However, this didn't end up happening until May 14th, 3 months after the initial drilling. I don't know why it took so long. I remember the concept sketches for the birds happening in a few days. I did them in my sketchbook, and that's where the final drawings would come from. I also happened to test the finish of the copper in that time as well, and that took 3 to 4 days. So I'm not sure why there is such a huge time jump, but there is one. Now, going back to the finish, I knew I didn't want the finish to be reflective because then it would take away from the details. Since I had previously come upon a unique texture finish, I wanted to try that out for this piece. That texture came from abrasive drill bits for the Dremel. I tried this out for Bahio, but it wasn't what I was looking for. I didn't know that these drill bits were a knockoff from the original polishing bits, but I did like the finish, so I decided to try it out. When getting a second opinion from my boyfriend, he did say that he could see the streakiness from the Dremel and it did bother him. In trying to find a solution to what I wanted, he said that maybe I should try an orbital sander so I could get an even look. I tried it out and I loved it. After that was tested out, I started on the final drawings in May of 2022. Originally, there were going to be 51 birds, but some of the poses got replaced, redrawn, or eliminated. At the end, I ended up with 49 that I was happy with, and all of these final drawings were made on the iPad for easiness. After they were done, I transferred them to a Word document to size them for printing. In July, my new copper sheet arrived. The sheet that I ordered was 18 by 24 inches. And a month later, in August, I started the process, printing out the birds, gluing them to the bigger sheet, cutting each individual plate, drilling each bird, cutting each bird, sanding all the sides, and repeat, repeat, repeat. Now, this is very shocking to me when I went back and figured all of this out, but it took me 4 months to drill over 1,470 holes and cut 49 birds. Looking back at this, I don't remember it taking 4 months. It literally felt like I worked on it every 2 months. I bought like 3 sheets of copper for this, and to me, it's just literally insane that I got it done that quickly. All of this doesn't take away from the fact that on December 9th, I managed to cut all of the birds and get them ready to be textured. Texturizing the birds took a few days because of the cleaning method that I was using. Now, while cleaning, some of the pieces would get retarnished based on the cleaner that I was using, and so they would have to be resanded, and that process was repeated multiple times until I was finally happy with the result of them. After they were basically clean enough, I took photograph of all 49 birds in all different types of angles so I could make a mock-up of what it would look like if they were placed on the wall, similar to Deborah's work. Reason being, I wanted to have a similar impact as Priestley's work and have each one individually mounted on the wall. But after making the mock-up and thinking about it a little bit longer, I wasn't happy with this decision, mainly because I knew that I would want to put this artwork up for sale and for someone to own it. At the same time, because I did only make 49 birds, unlike her 212 birds, it didn't have the same impact individually on the wall. It didn't fill up enough space. It wasn't impactful enough. So as a result, I did end up coming up with the idea of making a canvas for it, so it could become one whole coherent piece. Now, it is December, it is winter time, it is cold outside. I usually don't work on sculptures during the winter time because during this time I either make portraits or drawings or something where I can get cozied up. But at the time of me making the mock-up for Precisions, I ended up stumbling against an open call for a gallery, and I thought that this piece of work would fit perfectly with what they were asking. So I then had a new deadline to finish the canvas for the work, which was January 22nd. And so I basically stuck it up and decided to work during the winter time. And as soon as January 1st hit, I got to work. For the canvas, I had to measure the size that I wanted, which came out to 10 feet by 17 inches. The canvas took around a week to make, and after that was done, I prepped it and painted it in a color that would complement the copper if it were ever to oxidize. Then came the hard part of placing every single bird in the right spot. Because I had made the mock-up and I had also placed the birds on the floor to kind of have an idea of where they would go and how I would place them, I had a general idea of the spacing, and so I made a template from that. And even though I did have the template, I somehow managed to mess it up. It is not noticeable enough to the naked eye, so it's totally fine, but it is something that happens that I know about and now you know about. But yeah, the template helped me with placing the birds on there. They were glued on with this very strong jewelry glue. After that, I cleaned it one more time and the piece was done on January 20th. Now, it did turn out that taking pictures of this sculpture, very hard. So I did end up making a mock-up per se of what the sculpture would look like hung on the wall. And instead of taking pictures of the sculpture, I decided to make a video of me carrying it outside and turning around to show it to everybody. This video happened to do really well on Instagram, and the 1-year anniversary of that video literally just happened as of me recording this audio. It was 2 days ago. So yeah, it's all happening very quickly, and that's why I wanted to make this video this year, because it's been a year since the sculpture was made. I am very proud of myself for creating a big copper sculpture in the way that worked with the limitations that I had. This sculpture was simple yet detailed. It showed my skills and my patience when it comes to metal cutting, and I proved to myself that I could make a big copper sculpture outside of an institution. That was something that I was scared of, as I mentioned previously. You know, since I made ideology at PAFA, I wasn't sure when I was going to make my next big piece. And I'm happy that this was the one that I ended up making. In total, I spent around $425 on this sculpture. The sheets of copper that I used for this project came to 18 inches by 24 inches. Each sheet was around $150. And I ended up buying 2 or 3 of them to make all 49 birds. On positions, none of the birds repeat. Each plate is 6 by 2.5 inches. The birds take up a space of 2 by 2 inches. Some of the details for these birds are unbelievably small, and the only way I can convince you that that's the truth is if you see it in person. Now, I don't know if I covered every single thing I wanted to talk about in this video, so I did go on Instagram and ask people if they had any questions about it, and I did get a few, so I'm going to answer the ones that I didn't cover on this video. The first one being, does this sculpture have a meaning? Also, why birds? There is no meaning behind positions. There's no specific meaning behind it. It was just me challenging myself to see if I could create a large-scale copper sculpture. In terms of the birds, I find birds to be very aesthetically pleasing to look at. I love the amount of movement they portray. When I first started working with birds, they actually signified freedom to me. And I thought that was something important to share. But as I continued to experiment with copper, birds just became an aesthetic. I find them pretty, as I find the female figure and triangles to be pretty. What was the hardest part of making this sculpture? The hardest part was placing all those birds in the right spot and figuring out where they would be located. So this is a fun fact behind the scenes, I guess. As I was done cutting the batches of birds, I would look at both sides because it's a flat piece of metal, and would decide which side looked prettier to me, right? Which side I prefer the bird looking at. And then I would sand the edges. Only one side of the plate is sanded down. So one side is flat, the other side has a bevel. And it just happens to have worked out that the birds came to a perfect even number where one side is completely looking to the left and one side is completely looking to the right. And I think the middle is more of the miscellaneous, like they're kind of not looking either way. They're kind of like floating in space, or I don't really know what they're doing. But they're more of the ones that don't have a full direction. But yeah, somehow they ended up coming out to the perfect number of, oh, I have a perfect number for birds to look to the right, perfect number of the birds to look to the left. And I don't know why that happened. It's such a huge coincidence, right? That two things just accidentally happened to be perfect. The other was that I ended up with 49 birds instead of 51. And the 49 birds make it so there is one bird on each end. And I don't know, it just happens that for both circumstances, I ended up with the perfect number that I needed. And I did do a lot of the arrangement on the computer. Some of it was also like in person. I would arrange them and then find them on the computer and arrange them that way. I did take one picture of one of the birds wrong, where I did take the picture of the back and not the front, and that did mess up the final order for when I was placing them on the canvas. So that was the hardest part. Okay, this is a question that I got from someone, but this is also something that the curator from the State Museum of Pennsylvania asked me. Is this sculpture part of a series? No, it is not. I do have 2 birds that are part of the sculpture, but are not a continuation of the sculpture or create a series because of them being part of the sculpture. I don't know if that makes sense. But I do have this one bird that came from this sculpture called Uninhabited, which basically came to be because it was the very last bird that I was making from the batch of 49, but I didn't have enough copper for it. So I didn't print it out until the new sheet of copper arrived. But I printed it out in the wrong size. I sized it a little bit smaller than it was meant to be, and I didn't know this until I was done cutting the piece and placed it with the rest of the birds. And I was like, why is this smaller than the rest? Because I printed it to the wrong size. So it didn't get to be part of the flock because it would stand out for being the wrong size. And it did become its own little piece with its own little story. And I just think it's really adorable and cute. And it makes it that much more impressive actually, because I already think the details for this bird specifically on the original sculpture are small. The fact that I managed to cut smaller details for this one is very fascinating to me, and this sculpture is actually currently getting ready to be exhibited at a gallery in Delaware for the Delaware College of Art and Design. So it is making its way out there. The other piece that is part of the sculpture but it's not a continuation of the sculpture is the tester. But yes, the tester is its own separate sculpture that right now it's loose, but I do want to display it very similar to how Inhabited is being displayed. I just haven't had the chance to get to that yet, but if you are interested in owning this one bird, let me know. I will likely have it ready by February and it'd be available for purchase on my website. If you could help me give it a name, I'm not really sure what to name it. I thought about the tester just because it is the tester, but I think that is too harsh of a title for it and it deserves better than that. So if you could leave your suggestions in the comments down below, that would be awesome. Another question is, why copper? I find copper to be a very beautiful material. There is so much you can do with it and I haven't even reached most of its capabilities. The cool thing about it is that it's such a beautiful material, but it is also very affordable. So to me, that is a win-win. What was your goal with this piece in terms of the viewer? This is my goal for every piece, but I want the viewer to mainly focus on my creativity and craftsmanship. Of course, Deborah was a huge inspiration for the composition of this one. And I mainly just want people to look at what I have created and note that there was a lot of skill and technique that was put into it, that I had grown to make that sculpture. And it may not seem like it, right? Because I talk about the fact that in 2021, I barely had done anything with copper. And that's true. I did a few tiny sculptures. I did the 8-inch owl and I made Bahio. And then I worked on my self-portrait. But in 2022, when I was actually working on this sculpture, there were many copper sculptures that I made. And yes, like this sculpture took an entire year to make and finish. But keep in mind that it was only 4 months, the last 4 months of the year, that I actually devoted to cutting this sculpture. And so the previous months before that, I was making a lot of sculptures, a lot of jewelry that prepped me for the final product. And I think that's how I managed to get it done in 4 months. Because to me, it's still very unbelievable to say like, oh yeah, I made 49 birds in 4 months. Like that is insane. But that's just how it just seemed to happen. And based on everything that I made that year, I do believe it to be true. So that is why I would like the viewer to just mainly notice the craftsmanship, the work, the passion that went into it. And then the last question, if you could change anything about this piece, what would it be? Simple. I would replace some of the birds that I made. I don't know if replace, maybe redraw some of the birds. I'm not fully happy with some of them. I made the final drawings for this project like in July? I forgot the date, but that took me a few days. I had most of the concept drawings in my sketchbook, so all it took was putting it in the iPad, really quick, draw the same patterns over and over again. Got those done, I don't know, within a week. So there is a long time span between me creating the final drawings and me actually cutting the birds. So by the time I was like taking pictures of them and being like, oh, I remember this bird, or I remember that bird, I didn't like some of the birds that I've created. I realized that a lot of them lacked movement, looked a little bit too static. And so yes, there are some of the birds that I don't like. In conclusion, seeing positions in 2 galleries in 2023 was amazing. You know, retrieving this sculpture from the Art of the State was pretty hard because it just looks so pretty there. It really does stand out in almost every single picture that they took. And yeah, I don't know, it just made me very proud. Having this sculpture be exhibited twice gave me hope that in the future, if I fix a few things about it, it could potentially exhibit again and possibly sell. I do want this sculpture to be owned by somebody. I see it being beautifully displayed in somebody's living room. It's a one-of-a-kind piece, and it's just such like a beautiful, simple, but very detailed sculpture. And I don't know, I'm very proud. It's really nice to know that curators love this sculpture. I've gotten many compliments from the people who got to curate it and who got to see it in person. A lot of people seem to be drawn by it because they're very confused at what it is, or they're very impressed by the craftsmanship. And for that, you know, I think that this sculpture was a success. And again, I wouldn't be able to say these words if it wasn't for me seeing Deborah's piece, because I swear, like, if I hadn't seen her work, I wouldn't have made this. That is this video. If you guys enjoyed it, let me know. If you would like to support me and what I do, you can go ahead and check out my website. I have jewelry, sculptures, and even drawings for sale on there right now. That is the best way that you can support me. And yeah, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time.